Do you see it, Janae? Yes, we are. I'm just going to go out of frame.
You need to sign into the chat. This is like an endless game. Okay. What's the password?
Hey, Sarah.
Hello.
We're currently having some technical difficulties, so bear
Can you
with
hear
us.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a question also.
Yeah. Can you hear us? Let us know in the chat if you can hear us. Thank you, Sarah, for... Oh, hello, Bree. How are you? So we're having some technical difficulties here. So please bear with us. In the meantime, while we get some of the technical difficulties situated, I want to introduce you to our author, pardon me, Leslye Penelope. And we are going to be discussing her new book,
Daughter of the Merciful Deep.
Yep. And so just quickly, Leslye Penelope is the award-winning author of the Earth Singer Chronicles, the first book in the series, Song of Blood and Stone. It was chosen as one of Time Magazine's 100 best fantasy books of all time. Equally left and right-brained. I love that. She studied filmmaking and computer science at Howard University. Yay. And sometimes dreams in HTML. She hosts the My Imaginary Friends podcast, co-hosts the Ink and Magic podcast, and lives in Maryland with her feline dependents. Gotta love some feline dependents, right?
Yeah, we can't help it. They make us.
They make us who we are to some degree. Okay. So let's see if we can get... I'm going to go out of frame for a moment just to get the technical aspects together. And I'm going to leave Leslye here for a moment to her own devices. So if there is anything that you would like to talk about, maybe say something, hobbies, or I know that's pretty broad. Outside of writing.
Outside of writing. Okay, yeah. I do a couple of things sometimes outside of writing. Writing takes up a huge portion of my time. But I really love rock climbing and I've been climbing. I started climbing 5 or 6 years ago. Yeah, so I fell in love with rock climbing. My claim to fame is going out to Boulder and climbing the first flat iron, which is 1,000 feet. It took like 3 or 4 hours, but I didn't think I could do anything that high. I think it's important to have, when you're sitting writing a lot. I'm also a website developer, so I'm seated at my chair at my desk a lot, and having exercises and being healthy, like being a healthy writer. So many writers have so many like health problems and like repetitive stress injuries. So yeah, I think it's important to get out in the world if possible and touch grass, do things, do fun things. There's background noise. Yeah, the air conditioning is on here, the overhead air conditioning. So sorry if there is background noise. Other hobbies, I am a big film buff. I love watching movies. I was a film major at Howard and a computer science minor. I think that was in the bio. And so yeah, like film festivals are a huge thing that I love to do, and like watching interesting movies.
Okay, thank you. So we are really delighted to have Leslye here today at the library. And I know someone said something about the air in here, the air conditioning. We can't get it turned down, unfortunately. But this is a water bottle that, I don't know if you can see this, that says DC Public Library. It's pretty faint. And this is for Leslye.
So I can hydrate.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Keep hydrated. So I'm just gonna hop right on into the book. I finished it, and there was a quote that just kept like sticking in my soul, and just about remembering or memory. And when you started writing the book, was that your primary memory? Was a primary thought process for you, or
Yeah, when it
was it something
started,
else?
it wasn't. It came out as I was writing the book. So Daughter of the Merciful Deep, it is about an all-black town in the 1930s in the Deep South that's being threatened by the construction of a dam. And it's historical fantasy. So I don't name the state. I invented a town called Awanasa where this takes place. And I was really initially interested in the idea of community and family and found family, but Black people creating a community, a place of safety in these times. And memory, and especially ancestral memory and sort of collective memory, was a theme that I was thinking about a lot in my previous book, The Monsters We Defy, which is also another historical fantasy that takes place in DC. It's a historical fantasy heist. And so there are certain things that I feel like I come back to again and again in a period of time. And the idea of ancestral memory, I touched on it a little bit there, specifically like around destiny. And then here, I was still thinking about the same thing. So as I got into creating the characters and creating the town and realizing that this is a place of safety, but how do you create safety? And so much of Black culture dealing with pain is about not talking about it, but moving on. So there's resilience in the face of horrific acts of violence and just oppression and all of that. In order to move on, so often people forget. And so once that came into play, as I was thinking about Jane, the main character, who lives with a lot of guilt and trauma and has been trying to move on by forgetting, but she can't do that. And then once I realized, oh, I'm still dealing with memory, I'm still really interested in memory, then I really focused on it as a theme in the book.
Have you read River Solomon's
The
The Deep?
I did. When I was first getting this idea, I definitely read that.
Because that was one of the things that stuck out to me. I was like, River Solomon, The Deep. And because, as you know, that deals with a lot of memory and generational trauma and all of the things. But I have like two things of notes here. And one of the things that stuck out to me was religion, and how you're using it to influence the names of people and what their what their role is within. And so, like, we have one guard whose name is Ruth, and then there's David and Moses and Grace and all of the things. And I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, that religion plays a huge part for you in maybe your life or just in the book.
Yeah, it definitely plays a huge part in the book. I don't think you can write about Black people in the South and, well, Black people in general in this country, especially in that time period, without dealing with religion. My grandfather was a Baptist preacher. I didn't grow up Baptist, but I grew up with my father and my aunts and uncles being preachers' kids, and he had a church in Montgomery, Alabama, and so every summer we would go down there and go to his church. I grew up in a totally different kind of religion, and so it definitely has affected the way I think about the world, and that comes into your writing and the themes that you're dealing with. But yeah, I wanted to deal in this book with like a tension between Christianity and the Christianity that was basically forced upon Black people, and then also bringing in the tradition of West African religion tradition and folklore and how it was like syncretized and mixed into what the enslaved people were like forced to be seen to be believing, and then it sort of how it morphed and changed. I'm always interested in that and the way that West African traditions show up all across the diaspora. So there's in the book there's like a mythical place, New Ely, which is the magical, fantastical world, which is introduced here, and like that is very much based in this idea of like real West African religious concepts that were brought to the Americas. And so yeah, it's kind of like we have a preacher character, Jane. The character Jane, her father's a preacher, and some part of it is this tension between these two almost competing things that can be competing sometimes, but also are mixed together sometimes and form the foundation of Black culture to a certain degree.
So about the mythical town of New Ely, how did you come up with that? Because the description of that and how the other, do I want to call arcs, how the other arcs came to be, and how they are designated, if that's the right word, or set up within the archipelago. What was your thought process in coming up with New Ely?
Okay, so yeah, New Ely is, when I was writing this, the code name of the book was Black Atlantis, and originally I was thinking about, oh, what if Atlantis was Black? And then my editor was like, well, don't do Atlantis, do something original. I was like, oh yeah, that's better. So I was looking for inspiration for a sort of like African-inspired underwater world, and I found this folklore from Haiti, and I can't remember now the name of it, but like the idea of Guinea, that there's an island under the sea where the Orishas live, where the gods and goddesses live. And some place described it as like a mirror world. So in this book, New Ely is, the water is the sky and the stars are below, and it's an island that's basically floating in between. And there's a main island, and then there are arcs. And so, like, without spoilers, the arcs are sort of salvaged places from our world that have been brought there. And each one is completely unique. It's the idea is that I took a lot of inspiration from real places that might have been destroyed, and what if they had been saved and had been brought to this other place? So the arcs that are actually named are really based in real places that were like destroyed by hurricanes or water or some sort of disaster. And the actual visual of it, it's a bunch of floating islands that are connected. I was looking for visual inspiration, looking on Pinterest and like at different art sources, and I saw this artwork of just like floating islands, and they were kind of connected by bridges of different kinds. And I was like, ooh, that's interesting. I haven't seen or written about that before. So I envisioned them all as sort of connected, like an archipelago of connected floating islands. And sometimes they're connected by water or rainbows or bridges or different kinds of things to make it a fantastical world. And yeah, it was just about building a fantasy world that I thought was interesting.
Excuse me. So when I was reading it, I was like, oh, I really like how this is just, and I could see it. I could actually visualize each archipelago that was being described, and I was like, I'm here for that. And just the serene nature of it, even though it's not a utopia,
Right.
it's still very serene in my mind.
Mhm.
And someplace that I was like, um, when Jane had gone there, tried not to give away things.
She travels to a fantasy world. I can say that much, I guess.
Yeah. So when Jane had gone there, and I was just like looking at it through Jane's eyes, and just in awe, and thinking, okay, maybe she's in awe
Mhm.
as well, and just really, it totally immersed in that. So let's talk about characters. Jane, what was your thought process behind Jane, and how she came to be, and why did she have the disability that she had?
Yeah, so Jane is a mute character. She lost her voice. She wasn't born mute. She has selective mutism. It is a kind of aphonia that I researched, which is basically the inability to speak. So there's selective mutism where you choose not to speak because of trauma, but this is a different kind where you actually can't. Like, you try to speak and you can only speak in a whisper, and it's often still caused by trauma, and then an illness precipitates it. So the character of Jane was really inspired by, in part, like very loosely, not as much as I've done with other characters, but the town of Oscarville, which is under Lake Lanier in Georgia. So it's a real drowned town. It was an all-black town, and in 1912, basically the white people decided they did not want black people there anymore. They kicked them all out, like night riders, terrorized them and forced them all out. And then 40 years later, a dam was built and Lake Lanier was created. And so in 1912, there was an incident where a young white woman was assaulted and killed, and they rounded up sort of the nearest black men to arrest them and charge them with this crime. And then several people were lynched, and then 2 teenagers were eventually convicted and hanged. And Jane is the sister and cousin, the real Jane. Jane Daniel is the real sister and cousin of the 2 teenage boys who were arrested and convicted of this crime. And she, the real story that I read, she testified against her brother and her cousin. She was actually arrested for the crime as well as being an accessory. And apparently the night before the trial, she was visited by the local white men, and no one knows what happens in that visit, but the next day she testifies against her brother and her cousin. And so I was dealing with the idea of guilt, of a character, taking very loosely from that inspiration. What happens when someone has done something they feel is unforgivable at a young age and lives with guilt for many, many years? And how does that affect them? How do you overcome guilt? How do you forgive yourself? Can you forgive yourself? So that was all in my mind when dealing with Jane, and just the themes of memory and themes of guilt and forgiveness were paramount in that. And how does she live in this world? She survives her own particular traumas and comes to a place of this town where she's both accepted and keeps herself apart because of the things that have happened in her past.
And that's one of the things that I really enjoyed, is that she was on her own journey to figure out how she could save her town, and also to save her town, and to also save herself, and if I'm saying that correctly, and make sure that everyone that she held near and dear to her came out ahead. And one of the things, when we were just talking, one of the things that I thought about when I was reading was Black Wall Street,
Mm-hmm.
and how we all know what happened with Black Wall Street, I hope. But how people, or the white people, came into the town and just obliterated it, and now things are changing, so to speak. afterwards. But I thought of Snell
Mhm.
in that whole thing when at the end, I really thought of Snell and what he did and what he was doing to the town. And I was like, huh, here we are. History is repeating itself, and it will continue to repeat itself if we are not, if we don't keep it in the forefront of our minds. So, thank you for that, because it, like, automatically. I had a question and I just forgot. Um, Another thing that I noticed was immigration. When was that deliberate? Because you, and when I say immigration, for obviously I don't want to give anything away.
Like in New York?
Yes, in New Delhi.
Yeah, there's a conflict in the fantasy world because, as you said, it's not a utopia. So a lot of times in this kind of story, you would have this like utopic place where they can be saved, and they're trying to save their town by, turning it into a utopia, and that's not realistic, even in a fantasy. So yeah, there is a conflict that happens in this place that offers salvation, but I wanted just to have a more realistic or balanced view of what does salvation actually mean. I kind of dealt with this in Earthsinger Chronicles, so that's my first epic fantasy series, and there's a big conflict between these two countries for hundreds of years. And at the end of this, there's 4 books and 3 novellas in that series. I had to figure out how to solve this conflict that I've been building. And it was like when I was writing that final book, it's like, well, I don't know how to solve racism, but I have this basic racial conflict in this book. So what is a way that will make the story feel satisfying and, complete the arc that I've set up this whole time? And so in a similar way with the idea of New Delhi, and you have this fantasy world that is very much based in West African culture and a place of salvation and hope and joy and community and love, but it's not perfect. It's definitely not perfect, and it makes more sense to me. Like I like to have my books end in a sense of hope and a sense of joy. Especially with this story where it's real, deals with real history and real generational and racial trauma. But at the end of the day, I'm not trying to write trauma porn or to highlight that. I want to have you walk away from reading one of my books having a sense of hope and of joy and of honoring the resilience of our ancestors, but also and ourselves, but also acknowledging that no matter what solutions we come up with to very complex problems, there's not going to be a utopic solution. It's going to be still a little bit fraught. And we just get as close as we can to something that's better.
And to talk about that a little bit, not being a utopia and honoring our ancestors and so forth. One of the things that I picked up on was when Jane was having her memories, and she was having a memory of a specific person, or being given a memory of a specific person, and how Grace was, when she came back home from wherever it is that she was, she said that she was having a problem because Jane wouldn't talk about that person, and she was just, they both were outsiders in their own space, because one wanted to talk about something and the other didn't want to, couldn't talk about it. And I think, and that kind of hit home for me, because in my own family there are certain ancestors that we don't talk about because of the memories, be they good or bad, but we just don't want to dredge up that feeling of whatever that feeling may be. So why did you decide to have one sister want to talk about this particular ancestor and the other one not?
I think it's like you said, like, so memory being a theme in the book, the actual magic system incorporates memories. So that she learns, the main character Jane discovers she has access to this magic that is very memory based, and it involves being given a memory by an ancestor. Her sister Grace, like the prodigal sister, has come back home after 10 years away and has a different relationship to the trauma that they survived as children. And so Grace left, she's been out in the world. She comes back home and she's very distant towards her younger sister Jane. So Grace left and came home. And so she's not following the rules. Like in the rule of this house is with her father and these two sisters, we don't talk about this person who's gone because it's too painful. The whole motto of the town of Amanasa is ever forward, never backwards. They're always looking forward, they're never looking backwards. It's the memory again. So healing memory was definitely the theme I'm trying to drive home. And so Grace and Jane, these two sisters, represent two sides of that. And we know that Jane, being the main character, has to heal, has to figure out a way back towards being able to remember. Grace also has a journey because she's on a slightly different journey. She wants to remember. She's actively trying to get that. So she's on the other side of that conflict. She has different barriers. And so yeah, it was just a way of showing the sisters being far apart, starting far apart and moving closer together over the course of the story, and their different ways of dealing with the same situation and dealing with their own unique present day situations.
And they're in their own trauma and trying to come out of it the only way or the best way they know how with the resources that they have made available to them.
Right. Yes.
And Shauna, I hope I'm pronouncing Shuna, who is, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like I'm wrong, a child of Mama.
So yeah, there's I'm not going to spoil it, but there's I'm dealing with the Orishas essentially, and so different versions of them. I was really interested in how in different places they have different names, and you have Santeria and Voodoo and Contemple, and you've got these different expressions of similar ideas that come from West Africa. And they've been given different names and different properties, and sometimes sometimes Olokun is male, sometimes Olokun is female, and you have Umoja. So Oshun is in my version is Shuna. We have Olokun is Loku and Umoja is Yoja, and they're these deities that show up in the book. And so I have Shuna as being a younger deity, and she does have a voice in the book, and she has a presence because she has a relationship with some of the characters.
And I really liked Shuna, even though she was not a major character. I think she had a big presence, and that I'm going to digress for a second because this just came to my mind. So there's a medallion, and that has power, and that power I found very interesting. How it initiates. What was your thought process behind using a medallion to do what we needed it to do to help Jane?
Yeah, so the magic system in the book, basically you're given a token, and so there's different parts to it. And I was looking at different kinds of divination. So I think it's Ife. It's where in Yoruba they memorize a list of proverbs, or I'm not sure what they're exactly called. I can't remember, but they use those. So I wanted to incorporate actual practices that make it unique and make it different. And so having something to focus, and then you're gifted a memory from an ancestor, and it comes with basically a proverb or a bit of wisdom that you can then invoke to create change, which is the magic system. So all of these different parts are just putting together different concepts that I thought were having to do with memory, having to do with especially ancestral memory, and then developing the magic system around that, using inspiration from Yoruba tradition, but trying to do something that is unique. And again, like imagining this is just another version, another branch off of that tree, the way there are other branches off of that tree in the diaspora. And this version is called Omo. So the medallion itself, I don't know if it had any specific, it was just a way to say that, someone can be gifted this, you can be given this, and now you have access to this whole world of magic that you didn't have before. The specific item wasn't as important as the fact that it represented a gift that was given to you, and that now you're connected to something larger.
So, having said that, Mama Yoja and Papa Loku, they feature pretty prominently, but at the same time they're still in the background, and they're deities as well. What was the inspiration? Well, when I say the inspiration, I know that they're Orishas, but their personalities, because they're very, very interesting personalities.
I think just kind of researching different versions or views of the Orishas and what I needed them to do in the story. So we have Mama Yoja, who is, the caregiver, the mother figure who's created this world as a way to save her children. And then, Papa Loku being a version of Olokun, who is under the water. There's the stories of him being chained up at the bottom of the ocean, which are part of this tradition. And that seems like he'd be more removed. And just looking at different ways that people venerate these Orishas today and throughout history, and pulling out, okay, what would that look like? What is my version of them? I've read a lot of novels with other versions of these Orishas and how other people view them. And so it was just another way to see them. And Shuna is the same way. Looking at, Oshun is a favorite of a lot of people. And then why is that? Why are people connected to her? What does she represent? What are the things that she traditionally represents? And which one of those am I going to use and change? And there's so many different stories and so many different, emanations of all of them. So it really is just about creating characters that interact with each other as well as the human characters. And then how are they going to cause conflict or resolve conflict in the story? How are they going to be integrated into the story in a way that feels connected to just the version of them that I'm creating?
And the conflict between Mama Yoja and Papa Loku, that conflict, I definitely encourage people to read the book, because the conflict between the two of them, you must read. And I was like, oh, okay, how about that? And it was fun to read, but at the same time I was like, where is this conflict now going to go? So you have, in my opinion, a character that's a tree, the world tree, and I thought of several different things like the tree of knowledge or the tree of life, and all of those things were those inspirations for you coming up with this particular tree, or was that?
I think the initial inspiration is actually there's a poem that's in the epigraph at the very beginning of the book, and it's a poem by Olive Senior, who's a Jamaican poet, and she has several poems based on the Orishas, and she mentions the world tree, and I think that's where I first saw it when I was looking at this poem. I was like, that's interesting. And world trees come through different mythology. There's one, I think, in Scandinavian mythology, and so the idea of a tree of life, exactly what you're saying, all of that kind of comes into it, but I hadn't thought of it in this context until then, and then it just sort of grew. And I thought about what the origin of New Ely, this island, this fantastical world, which I go through in the book in a way, as being, in the seeds of this tree, and just teasing out the metaphor with a very natural, organic way of spreading life and community, and the idea that the tree would have seeds and those grow into other trees, and it's connected to nature and to life all throughout the world.
and that's one of the things when I was reading it and reading about the tree, and I immediately thought about particularly Black people's connection with the earth and with nature and with plants and things like that, and how particularly back in the day how we relied on um, herbal medicines and medicinal medicines and things like that. We lived off of the land, and that's one of the things. That's what I thought about with this tree, and how um, it's a life force for so many, and it gives unconditionally for the most part, um, and it has some problems, as we all do, and how we need to fix it in order to make ourselves better and to keep it healthy. So um, I want to be mindful of your time. So we have 15 minutes. Do you want to take questions? Would you like to take questions? Or, I mean, we can keep talking about the book.
Yeah, if
I have
anyone
lots
has
of
any
things.
questions, I'm totally open. Yeah, there's a lot of history
Yeah.
within the book also.
Yes.
I don't know where to start. So, we read, for my book club in high school, we read the Monsters of the Farm. I haven't read this one, but I have. Right? And I was seeing parallels between the two books.
Yeah.
Right? Monsters of the Five, quite a few considered very prominent. You know, it's kind of like historical, I don't know what to call it, historical fantasy.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, historical, yeah. And then from what I know about this book, it's also coming from that same thing where it's based in history and there's a fantastic element. In the Monsters We Defy, you have the enigmas,
Yes.
and when we were analyzing it with my students, we made parallels to the Orishas. And then over here, I haven't read the book, but you mentioned the Orishas played a prominent role in this book. And so, I guess what I see in your work is, and I'll go back to mine, it'll make sense. I grew up in a very pious Christian home. We did not venerate our ancestors. There was a hard line between the realm of the seen and the realm of the unseen. With your work, there is not a hard line. It's very fluid. It's like the first time I saw the line, I was like, oh my God. In Asian culture, they're embracing this whole aspect of the ancestors, and they have this whole narrative about, this ancestral realm and, like that. What is it that you're trying to go ahead and deal with in your work when it comes to the realm of the ancestors and the unseen and how it interacts with our everyday life?
Yeah. So the question is about dealing with the realm of the ancestors and the unseen in my work. Yeah, that's a really great way to put it. There's a lot of, even though The Monsters We Defy and Daughter of the Merciful Deep don't technically take place in the same world, I wasn't able to make that fit. There's a lot of communication between those two books in terms of the themes that I was dealing with. Absolutely, the enigmas were very much inspired by the Orishas, and even the names of some of the enigmas that I give in that book. I think I don't know if I say it or because the different versions are in my head, but Mama Brigitte and Carrot. I had been doing a lot of research on voodoo, and the Loas, and there's a lot of parallels with the Orishas, and so yes, all of that is in there. In writing historical fantasy, and specifically books that take place in our worlds, but that are also truly fantastical, like these last two books that I have, I think that I'm really interested, having grown up in a Christian religion that is kind of similar. You can say whether there's people who, well, not do that, but in Christian religion, there's certain ideas and you keep things separate. But in African traditions and traditions of through the whole diaspora, it is much more fluid. It is much more, what people term as magic is religion in some places, and so it's about how you view it. It's the lens that you're looking at it through. And so even traditions, things like hoodoo, and even though my grandparents were Christians, but there were still elements of what I would consider hoodoo that made its way into, like old wives' tale. Like saying, don't let someone, if you cut your hair, don't leave it around. Like collect it, make sure it's not around. So someone can put roots on you. My grandma's a Christian, but she told me these things. And so there's all these connections. And I think that's because, we had to be seen as being Christian. At least the enslaved people had to be seen as being Christian, regardless of what their actual beliefs were. And through the generations, they meshed. And so there was a lot of, and I see this in at least friends of mine who are from Africa, but they're like, we have the altar and we also pray to Jesus just in case we keep our bases covered. And I think there's an element to that in African American culture as well. So yeah, for me, it's just looking back and trying to kind of being interested in these things and making sense of them in different ways, and just being really fascinated by the ways that Black culture expresses itself and what we've taken from Africa and what we've combined with European things like Native American traditions and beliefs and religions, and we've just created our own thing here. A lot of being just a Black American, like not having other ancestry. Like when I first published Song of Blood and Stone, the publisher asked me, "Oh, is it based on African mythology? Is it based on this and that?" And I was like, "It's not really. Insofar as I'm Black, I don't have. That's not my immediate culture. I like the idea of that Black people came and created a thing. We made our own thing here, and essentially that's kind of what I'm just trying to honor and portray in different ways through the fantasy lens, through taking pieces, maybe the same piece. I'll take the same inspiration and remix it 3 different times in 3 different books. And it's cool if people see that connection, because I'm doing the same thing. I'm just trying to do it differently and show you a different prism, show it through a different prism.
If anybody in the chat has questions, please put them in the chat and we'll get to them.
Hi, I'm also, part of what I do, I teach, and I focus on. Hello. So part of what I do is teach, and I focus on creative technology. I haven't read any of your books, but it seems like your book is focused on memory technology, which is, because I deal with technology, creative technology, technology goes forward, but the base of it, the root of it, it deals in knowledge tech. So how does that knowledge tech, ancestral memory, how do you basically grapple with it? Because it's a big thing going on right now, is people suing for intellectual properties. A lot of countries, intellectual properties was co-opted into medical technology, into digital technology, and so forth. Because when I listen to you, it's a real thing. Memory tech is basically knowledge tech. Like when I'm listening, I'm just making a connection. So how do you, grapple with that? It's actually going on right now. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, so I think I love that memory technology. Because I don't think this book is really technologic, but memory magic is very much a theme in this book. And to a certain degree in The Monsters We Defy, although it's different. The idea of destiny, memory, communing with ancestors, specifically ghosts in that book, and ancestors who are in different forms in this book. So these are historical, and I want it to be in conversation with the things that are happening now, because there's so many parallels between the things that happened 100 years ago are still happening today to a certain degree. And how do you honor and listen to the wisdom? How is wisdom passed on from our elders and our ancestors to now, and how can we put that into play and use it? And because I'm writing fantasy, it's I invent magical means for that to happen. But I think I can envision another book where it actually is memory technology. I'm actually working on another book where, because I'm a website developer, and so where you code magic, essentially. You create a magical compiler that takes your code and makes it real. And that idea, so there's another example of expressing that idea in different ways. How can it have actual memory technology, memory magic,
connecting us through the years, because I do think that's the way we solve things. I think there is wisdom that has always been around that maybe we've lost access to or we haven't paid attention to. And these fights that we are having over intellectual property, over people trying to remove history from classrooms and remove history from our children, how can we protect that, protect those memories, protect those histories, protect that knowledge? That's our challenge. And so whatever work can help you think about it in new ways, whether it's inventing things and sparking creativity for actual real life solutions to these problems, that's one of the things that I think fiction can help do. And even fantasy fiction can help inspire people towards solutions in the real world. Yeah, thanks. He has a question.
Hey Leslye, I had a question about arcs. You remember you mentioned arcs in your book. It's ARKS, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the biblical arcs.
Right.
So I guess I had a question about, in your research and your obvious biblical knowledge about Noah and whatnot, did anything about that tale stick out to you when you were creating this book, and like the edict of like put these animals and these things inside these arcs and the flooding?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the whole book is about a flood. It's going to destroy this town and drown it essentially under water. And the opportunity for salvation is in this fantastical world that creates arcs of places that need to be saved. So it was really just bringing in, because in this fantastical world, even though it is inspired in large part by African mythology, combining that with African American Christianity. And so the common language was Christianity, was the Bible, for people who are coming from different places. So there is, I kind of talked about a little bit earlier, the ranks in this fantastical world are based on biblical characters. There's a character who is the David. There's the Jonah, the Ruth. So these are our titles, like the general or something like that. Other than that, specifically digging into the sort of the Noah story, I don't think it was anything more specific. It was just the idea, okay, we create an ark to save something. I wanted a word that meant we're creating this land, we're creating this way to save these communities and to bring them into this fantastical world.
Okay, so you also have a question from the chat. So the chat, anime fan asked you have such a great way of mixing real world elements like community and aspects of Black culture and fantasy. I'm wondering, how do you keep the balance between the two?
Hey, anime fan, that is a good question. I think that Black culture is so much fantastical. Like, there's so much wonder and awe and magic that is infused within it in general that inspires me a lot. And balancing the two is really the story itself. So the Monsters We Defy basically took place all in our world, all in DC. We didn't travel to a fantastical world. We had the enigmas, these spirits who are sort of bubbling up into our world. And then this book, I actually do take you to someplace else that I create. It's a bridge between my epic fantasy and historical, like real world fantasy. And because the stories required different things, I think, for me, it was how am I going to ground it? How am I going to create a place that is a character? And is that place in our world, or is it in like a liminal space between worlds? So yeah, balancing is really just figuring out the character, the plot, what they need, what the story needs, and how much, because each book is going to be a little bit different. This is a story about a town and in saving this town and making sure that it continues because it is a place where people have found solace and home in an inhospitable world. And so the traveling to the fantastical world was in service of saving this place that I had created, that I wanted to be a community, that I wanted to be a character, a location that's a character. And that balance was struck differently than in other stories. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay.
Wow.
So are there any more questions in the chat, or is that it? No. All right. So
Thank you.
spree. So I think we're gonna wrap it up. We do have a drawing because we have a couple of books that we are giving away. Yeah, courtesy of the Friends of the Library, Shaw. Wakaji Daniel Shaw, Friends of the Library. So thank you very much to them for providing us a couple of books to give away. And we're going to do that now. Would you like to pick?
Six.
Oh my God, it's me. I can
Wish we had this on camera. Audience. All right.
Another one.
So one more.
Deckled edges.
Has deckle
Love
badges.
deckle- yeah.
Fancy.
Love that.
Three.
Oh,
Oh my
there you go. There you go. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I hope you guys enjoyed it in the chat. Thank you for joining us live. Appreciate it.
I'll sign them. Yeah.
And thank you guys in the audience. You can't see our audience, but I thank them. They're here. They're for real. They're real people.
Thank you.
So have a good day, everybody, and I will see you next time.
Are you signing?
Yes, I guess. I have some bookmarks too.
Oh,